Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly governance update. I always get so excited when this time rolls around every week because I know I'm going to spend some quality time with Steve Cooper, Chief of Staff for the VLGA, and we have lots to talk about this week. Steve, how are you?
I'm well, Chris, and the pleasure and the quality times with you, so thank you.
Now, I don't know whether people who are watching this on YouTube may notice, they certainly won't on the podcast version, but we have made an effort to find something purple in the wardrobe today.
We have indeed, because today's Wear It Purple Day 2021, and we think that is an event worth noting and following up on and contributing to.
Absolutely. So it's a day all about fostering supportive, safe, inclusive, empowering environments for rainbow young people is how it's put. And I heard it put very, very eloquently and succinctly this morning on ABC News Breakfast by Nate Byrne. I don't know if you saw that, Steve, but Nate also at the time alerted me to, and many others, to the existence of a new video that's come from the Knox City Council Youth Services Project, the Rainbow Action Group, a thing called Still Me. This is the second one they've done, a very impressive that's come out of that project. Have you seen it?
From a Rainbow Youth Committee that the Knox City Council run. And as you said, they're demonstrating commitment because it's not a flash in the pan, the production of a film, which is just terrific. Yeah. And I noticed too, Chris, that numerous councils are conducting events to mark the day. One example I picked up on was Mitchell Council running an online afternoon tea for the Rainbow Youth cohort later in the day today. And I'm sure just about every council's got some sort of an event going on for the day.
And so they should. That's terrific, terrific to mark the Wear It Purple Day, as we're also doing right here.
It's not just symbolic. It is actually a really pragmatic thing to do for councils to lead on this topic because for a whole range of reasons, people should be able to live their best lives. There is an economic as well as personal cost to the community if they don't. The self-harm rates in the Rainbow cohort from 15 to 25 are horrendous, and as a nation we should do something about it. And I think the best thing is it makes good business sense as well. So lots of reasons to do it.
Couldn't agree more. And it sort of leads us into our next item. When we're talking about respect and inclusiveness, etc., you're talking more broadly about cultural issues. Do you like what I did there? And the Minister for Local Government, Sean Lean, has officially announced this morning the start of the culture project that he flagged some time ago. We've got some more detail now on what that review looks like and what it will entail.
You're on a roll, Chris, because I think you should keep going. You know that the minister's issued a press release this morning, and you are just bursting to tell people who's going to be running this review.
I'm happy to do that. And I'm also pleased to say I did have the opportunity to have a chat with the minister earlier in the week about this. And we're hoping that as the project gets underway, we'll spend some more time on VLGA Connect talking about it. So the government's engaged PricewaterhouseCoopers and are they any relation, by the way, PricewaterhouseCoopers?
I only wish, Chris, I only wish.
And two very eminent academics, Professor Graham Sansom and Professor Anona Armstrong. They're going to be running the review. And I think the first step is to pull all the information together and develop a discussion paper, which will then be used as the basis for broader engagement with the sector. And timing-wise, I think you'll find that engagement will happen in the early part of next year. But this is something the sector really needs to engage with, in my view, and make the most of this opportunity to really set the platform for discussing and what's the word I'm looking for? Setting the benchmark of what we expect as a minimum culturally across the sector.
Chris, I think, and we've talked about this before, there is no more important task, not my words, but Edgar Schein of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, no more important work for leaders than to set the culture. Because if we don't attend to that in a way that's meaningful and not fluffy, then we set up organisations to either fail or succeed. And let's, do our best work in that space. So it is really important work. Interestingly, Chris, I had the opportunity last evening to go to a webinar. Monash University Press released a series of little books called In the Public Interest. And there was a series that were launched last evening with a panel, including Jenny Macklin and Kate Thwaites, the Honourable Jill Hennessy, Fiona McLeod SC, Professor Samantha Comforts, who's done a whole lot of work in the military, talking about really a theme around respect. Fiona McLeod, and I'm really looking forward to her reading her book, because she talked in really excoriating tones, I think you'd say, about the impact on culture, to the use and sort of almost covert acceptance of practices in government that might be more around re-election rather than the public interest, and really aimed at all levels of government. So, you know, as people working in the public sector, I think paying attention to this topic is just vitally important, and commend the Minister for launching the review.
Agree. As you say, the more we talk about it, and people are talking about it, just coming to mind is a very recent development at Georges River Council in New South Wales. Of course, New South Wales councils are going to election in the next few months. They've launched this online public register and are asking all candidates to take a pledge of respect to set that minimum standard of behaviour in the lead up to the election. And I do know that that is based on work that's being done by the ALGWA group, the Australian Local Government Women's Association, and they've got an aim to see that replicated across the nation, really, which I think is a terrific and lofty aim. And I suspect that's something we'll be talking some more about as well.
A whole other topic there, Chris, that in fact that you and I probably aren't the best qualified to explore completely around how gendered some of this misbehaviour is.
All right, we've got a lot to get through today, so we better keep moving, and we've got a guest waiting in the lobby. We noticed this week that there's been some changes to the award, the Victorian Local Authorities Award this week. And potentially some more too, because there's some contested issues here in the application that's been brought by the Australian Services Union, being considered by the Fair Work Commission. So we thought we'd go to an eminent source to find out more about this one, Steve.
Chris, if only we had a lawyer to talk about this.
Because you and I are not lawyers, as we may have said. We do have a lawyer. Let's invite him in to the governance update. And Steve, we're delighted to have joining us on the program this week from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, employment lawyer Richard Scougall, special counsel with Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, to talk about the award. Hi, Richard.
Oh, g'day, Chris. G'day, Steve.
G'day, Richard.
Thanks very much for joining us. We thought it was probably useful just to do a bit of an explainer for people who don't understand how the employment framework, I guess, works in Victorian local government. And we've had some developments with some changes to the Local Authorities Award. Can you just step us through the process that's happened more recently?
So what's happened is that the ASU, the Union for Local Government, has made an application to the Fair Work Commission to vary the Victorian Local Government Industry Award. And so what they did was in June, they made an application to change certain aspects of that Victorian Government Award to bring it up to speed with the Local Government Industry Award in Australia generally. Mm-hmm. So in Australia, just to take a step back, you know, we've got the award system, and there's a Local Government Industry Award in Australia generally that's been updated across the last 11 years or so. But those updates didn't apply to the Victorian Local Government Award because of the way that it came into being. So the ASU's brought the application to modernise the Local Government Award in Victoria even further.
So Richard, how does that award process sit alongside the role of each council as an employer making periodically an enterprise agreement with its staff?
Yeah, that's right. So the award sets the benchmark when you're making enterprise agreements. So enterprise agreements have to pass the BOOT, the Better Off Overall test. And the award is the benchmark when they're comparing the enterprise agreement to make sure that the entitlements in the enterprise agreements meet the minimum requirements for the sector.
Richard, I'm very impressed you didn't say BOOT test, as many do. It's like an ATM machine, isn't it?
That's right, yeah, or GPS.
Yes. So, given that context, what's actually changed in this latest round of what the Fair Work Commission has considered?
Yeah, sure. So there's been some amendments that have been accepted, and those relate to requests for flexible working arrangements, block release training and fees, payment on termination of employment, time off instead of payment of overtime, agreement of time off instead of payment of overtime, annual leave in advance, agreements to take annual leave in advance, and dispute resolution training leave. So all of those things are uncontroversial because they essentially exist in the terms and conditions already through the enterprise agreements and council's policies. There was one change that the union sought, which was controversial and which has been opposed by councils, and that's the introduction of a 2-hour minimum engagement for casuals. And that's been opposed by all of the councils because they have certain casual employees who they like to engage for less than 2 hours. And council says that if there was a requirement to pay them at least 2 hours, then that would disrupt the way that they engage these employees.
Richard, a lot of people looking in would say that it's quite a fair thing that a casual be paid a minimum of, say, 2 hours. What are the sort of circumstances that might give rise to a payment of less than 2 hours in the view of the councils?
There's a couple of jobs in council where employees are often engaged for less than 2 hours. And these jobs include crossing supervisors, people that work at swimming pools and recreation centres, and carers that go out to residential assistance with people in the community. These are some areas where employees are often engaged for less than 2 hours already. And this is a long-standing practice in councils. It goes back to the previous enterprise agreement, the previous awards, going back into the 90s and beyond that as well.
Richard, are you able to speak to the ASU's position on why they're seeking that change?
Well, the submissions that they made when they made the application was to say that they wanted to bring it up to speed with the Local Government Industry Award that applied in the rest of Australia. So there's a Fair Work Commission review process that is supposed to take place every 4 years to look at the modern awards and make sure that they're up to date and in step with community expectations. And the Local Government Industry Award that applies in the rest of Australia had been modernised in keeping with that process, but the Victorian one had not. So those areas that I mentioned before had gradually been improved, or entitlements had been granted to staff, you could say, in those areas. But this hadn't happened in the Victorian Award. And the ASU has moved to further modernise the Victorian Government Award.
So what happens now, as I understand it, the uncontroversial items have been accepted, but this issue of the minimum engagement time for casuals is contested. So what are the next steps? The
uncontested changes have been put into the award already, and they applied from Monday, the 23rd of August. The 2-hour minimum engagement of casuals has been opposed by council. And so this has been programmed by the Fair Work Commission for a contested hearing. So there'll be some court dates, if you like, set down, and the Commission will consider further submissions and evidence from the parties who are interested before making a final decision about this casual issue to decide whether or not to put that into the award as well, or not to do that.
Richard, thank you. That really explains it very clearly. We'll wait to hear what happens with that final contested item. Now, just before we let you go, we thought we probably should explain why you've got the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. I know Steve gave you a heads up about us wanting to wear a purple item today, but you didn't have enough notice to find a purple item in your wardrobe, did you?
That's right, yeah. So I had a look, but I couldn't find anything appropriate to wear that was purple. So I've changed my pronouns, and I thought I'd put the Golden Gate Bridge in the background as well to recognise the day.
I think that's a great effort, because I understand your only option was your purple dressing gown.
Yeah, I thought that was a bit too, working from home a bit too far, so I left that in the wardrobe.
Thank you, Richard. Great to meet you and great to speak with you. We really appreciate your time to explain the ins and outs of those industrial relations or employment award changes that are happening in the sector.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers, Richard.
Steve, I think we've unearthed a new star of podcasting, and well, at least in the governance world. What do you think?
Well, I just think Richard actually is authoritative and a clear communicator. So that's a high bar for this little escapade each week, Chris.
Speak for yourself. By the way, I did notice earlier, before we started speaking to Richard, you used the word excoriating. I thought that might be a good entry for that lexicon we're building of governance words of the day.
It could be. I was one-upping someone on the panel, Chris, who described it as searing, but I thought excoriating was fine.
Fair enough. A couple of other stories we want to touch on before we move on for another week. This one caught my eye, Steve. Coffs Harbour Council in New South Wales. 4 councillors there are facing disciplinary action after the Office of Local Government has reviewed something that happened earlier in the year and found that they've engaged in misconduct. And this is related to those 4 councillors failing to attend 2 meetings of the council, thereby depriving the council of a quorum when there was a particularly important matter of business being considered. Now, I don't know about you. I've seen this sort of thing happen before. Have you?
Oh, rich history on this topic, Chris. And it's when you mentioned it, I thought there's a few relevant aspects. One being, of course, that in the previous legislation, we used to have a thing called a call of the council, yes. Where the municipal clerk could ask the minister to insist that councillors attend meetings. But clearly that wouldn't happen unless there'd been an issue with councillors not attending meetings. So there is clearly a history. That is a matter that is now dealt with under the governance rules of councils, as I recall. And it's interesting also that the duties of councils, as you've described, in the 2020 Act actually include attendance at meetings. Who knew?
Yes. So the call of the council provision's gone from LGA 2020, has it? Well, there you go. Yes. I hadn't had cause to consider that. I do have, I am able to say that I have been in the situation of an administration where that call of the council provision has been used. And it was interesting times. But anyway,
you're in a rare club, Chris, because yes. You know, the history would be that there would be a number of minor infractions before one got to that point.
Correct. That's correct. So in this case, the I forget what her title is, OLG Coordinator General, Kirsten Fishburn is her name. She's looked at this matter. She's described the conduct as premeditated and deliberate, improper and unethical, and inconsistent with the duties and obligations expected of an elected representative. The upshot is they're facing this disciplinary action and they're having their sitting fees suspended for 2 months. So that's sending a pretty strong message, I think, especially ahead of elections that are coming up across New South Wales in a few months.
Yeah, and there's some really strong issues. We just keep coming back to culture, Chris, that even the way that we've talked about it sort of indicates that it goes on and it's acceptable and that somehow it's part of the game of council when, you know, I'm hoping that really part of the cultural review I guess inspires all of us to, you know, aspire to the highest standards.
Now, Steve, a bit of a legal note, another reminder that we're not lawyers, but I know people have been watching a matter in the Supreme Court very closely recently. This is a case that was brought by the Mornington Peninsula Beach Box Association. If I'm understanding this correctly, they've challenged the validity of a special charge that's been imposed by that council.
That's my understanding too, Chris, and the Supreme Court handed down a decision in early August. And you're quite right, the challenge by the association was on the basis that the beach boxes don't have a bin, so why should they pay for a waste charge? Now, what I'm going to say, I think, is also cause for councils not to get too smug because the council in this case was successful, but it's useful to remember that any rate or charge by a council could equally be subject to challenges, and sometimes councils are not successful. So this is a space to pay attention on. I should also add there was a bit of judge speak in the way that the decision was made. And I think when the judge says the plaintiffs have had considerable difficulty articulating their case, that there might be an underlying message in that. Yes. That said, and the judge was also querying the form of relief and said, why didn't you use an interlocutory injunction or something like that? Anyway, they heard the matter nonetheless. And what the Beach Box Association and the other plaintiffs said was that the charge should be limited to the costs associated with collection from the charged property. So only the cost of collection from the beach boxes should be charged to the beach boxes, if there is a charge, it should only apply to the properties for whom the service is offered. So there were two kind of tranches to their argument. And I guess the short answer is neither of them was successful and the council won, which I think is a bit of a long-standing issue that councils have dealt with over the years from time to time, that sometimes these charges pick up properties who don't receive the service, which is a matter worth review.
It's the same argument, really, that many have tried to run against rates in general, isn't it, Steve? That, you know, if I don't use that road, why should I be paying for that road? Or I don't use the library. So it sounds like the same sort of argument to me.
It's a similar argument. It was interesting that you might recall the rate review that the state government did about 12 months ago. One of the very early findings was that rates are not a fee for service.
Yes.
And we should just remember that.
Now, Steve, there's another matter that we've been keeping an eye on. That is the Inspectorate having brought a matter to VCAT, looking to have a councillor stood down while a criminal matter, or a court proceeding, if you like, was taking place. We've got an update on that?
We do indeed, Chris, and this is another one of those times where we need a lawyer, but we haven't got one. So, as I understand, the inspector, the municipal inspector, has made an application to refer this matter up to the Supreme Court to get a ruling. There's a couple of elements to this. The first is VCAT could make a ruling on the particular question, which I'll come to in a minute, but the findings of VCAT don't create precedent in a legal system. So what the inspector needs is for the Supreme Court to make a ruling. So this question will never have to be asked again. And in that sense, I sort of point to, there was an article in the media which sort of implied that it was somehow the fault of the councillor, that the taxpayer was bearing the cost of the Supreme Court hearing. And in fact, the taxpayer will bear the cost because the inspector took it there, in much the same way as the tax office will often fund the costs of the other party when they go off to the High Court or a higher court to get a ruling. So that's the first bit.
Right, and the thinking there is let's get a definitive ruling on this so that we never have to have an open question on this matter in the future.
That's exactly right. And Chris, can I just give a quick nod to our anonymous source who's given us a quite good background on this. So thank you to that person who shall remain nameless. The reason for the ruling is the way that the Act has worded. There's an inference, there's actually more than an inference, that to apply Section 229, the inspector needs to ensure that the provisions of Section 224 are met. And it is quite obvious on reading that the provisions of Section 224 are not going to be met. So the inspector needs to basically get a ruling that even though that's what the Act says, it couldn't possibly be what was meant. And in fact, it's a drafting issue.
Right. Okay. So potentially an error in the way the legislation's been framed.
Quite possibly. An unintended oversight.
Yes. All right. Good. Thank you for that clarification. Again, we'll keep an eye on that. How soon do we think that next step will happen?
I think it's a matter for Her Honour Justice Quigley's diary as to when a court date can be found, Chris.
Final note, a new newsletter out from the Local Government Inspectorate this week. Must declare, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I know you have.
Well done to the Inspectorate. Bit of a read about conflict of interest, some stuff about numbers around candidates failing to submit campaign donation returns after the 2020 elections, and that number's down, which is good. Some information about their review of personal interest returns. Maybe at some point we'll talk about it again, Chris, that there's been some warnings on social media use ahead of the South Gippsland election. That might even be something we could talk about next week. The thing I found really interesting, though, is that the Inspectorate has come out very strongly around people who are dissatisfied with the status of an investigation badgering their office to get a particular outcome, and told a couple of rather harrowing stories of people contacting on multiple occasions and seeking action. Really, the inspector sent a very strong message.
All right, I look forward to reading that. And just you've reminded me on the social media issue, our friends at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers have issued some a piece of thought leadership, you might want to call it, around social media and the impact on elections just in the last week or so. So another reason perhaps to come back to that topic.
Check your socials on that. And Chris, while we're just winding up and we've talked about South Gippsland, can I just give a shout out that Deborah Wu at the VLGA has led a program of sessions under the Local Women Leading Change banner, which was subject of some funding from Local Government Victoria to run workshops for women who might be considering standing for council, consistent with the government's policy of seeking to get to 50% of female representation in local government. So 3 terrific workshops have been run in South Gippsland. I'm looking forward to doing some work with them next week on some candidate workshops because they've got elections coming up in October.
Yes, I think you've got 2 candidate workshops coming up, haven't you?
That's it. And anyone in South Gippsland who wants to come along, get on the VLGA website. They're in the events calendar.
Absolutely. Well done. Thank you, Steve. We might call that a wrap, and I look forward to catching up with you on the latest in local government governance news next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, Chris. Good yarn. See you.
That's the governance update for the 27th of August, would you believe, from VLGA Connect. Thank you for your company. We'll look forward to catching up with you again very soon.